Greetings, mortals. It is I, Remortis, coming at you with another guide for Vrising. This time, we'll be going over servants, the loyal companions that you mentally subdue that will defend your castle to their very last breath. But they can also help you in other ways too by sending them off on different hunts to gather resources for you. In this video, we'll be going over the best servants for PvP, which ones are best for gathering loot for you, as well as the best servants for each region. But fear not, there will be timestamps below to skip to what is relevant to you. And enough of all this. Let's just get right into it, shall we? You can get servants pretty early in the game by just simply following the quests in the top left corner of your game. Once you finally make your stone coffin, you'll be given the quest to get Dominate Human, which you can activate by holding left control and then selecting the Dominate Human ability, which will replace your active spells with an ability called Subdue Human, which you will shoot out a little projectile towards a target, and it will latch onto them and will do a little bit of damage over time. And once they get below 30% health, similarly to like how you can feed on them, they will be subdued under your control, which you must then take back to your base and shove them in one of these servant coffins. After about 20 to 40 minutes, that servant will be yours. And once you finally first subdue your first servant and interact with them, you'll be then given a quest to make your throne. And once you've done that, simply sit in your oversized chair and the mission map will appear, showing the various zones. We have Farbane Woods in the south, Dunley Farmlands in the center, north and south Gloomrot, the Cursed Forest, Silverlight, and the new zone, Ruins of Mortium, each with their own points of interest that you must physically discover before you send your minions to gather these resources, which you'll end up typically finding by hunting the various bosses through the game. The success of each hunt relies on your servant's gear, perks, and the duration of the expedition. Let's pull up a hunt over here. We'll just use the Bandit Copper Quarry, for example. And you'll see a few things here, starting off with the difficulty rating, which is 300, which your servants must meet or beat to have a 100% chance on the mission. And the duration of the hunt also plays a role here. So let's look at a mission with a hunt duration of 8 hours, which gives no modifier to success or failure. We will send Agent 47 here, and we clearly beat the difficulty requirement, and upon completion, they will return with 750 to 900 copper ore, which is not bad. However, you see this takes 8 hours, and if we look down here to 2 hours, we essentially make half that amount of copper ore in a much shorter time. So while that mission might take 4 times longer to succeed, we would get a lot less if we sent them on 4 2-hour duration hunts, for example. But there's always a higher chance of injury when you send them to the shorter hunts, not to mention the lower success chance. But by having more than enough gear score, you won't have to really worry about that. Although not everyone has all the time in the world to play to continuously send them on 2-hour missions, perhaps you might need to go out for errands, or go to work, or go to sleep. You can send them on longer durations based on when you think you're going to return. So if you know you're not going to be playing for the next day or so, put it on a full 23 hours. If you don't think you're going to be till later that day, maybe 8 to 16. To be optimal, the best thing to do is send them on multiple 2-hour missions, if you can support that. It's not the end of the world if you can't, but it's just more loot for you in shorter time. And then another thing to note on these missions is the region perk. As you can see here, this is in the Farbane Woods, as notated here by Farbane Hunter, which means that should we send a minion that is from the Farbane Woods, we will get 20% more resources. So if we look here, I'll just use another character, say Sandra. So she would get 300 to 360. Get rid of her. Let's bring our Agent 47 back. Now we get 380 to 460. Pretty nice. So it's actually a lot more. So that's you definitely want to have a character from that region that you're trying to send missions to. The other thing to note as well is the type of mission, which is dictated by the blood type of your minion. Essentially, there are 5 types of missions. We have Tenacious Strength, which is brute blood. Typically, these missions are sent to quarries to gather minerals and ores, so you're always going to have at least one brute. And then we have military tactics, which is warrior blood. Typically these are at boss locations or fortified areas and will yield manufactured goods. And then we also have tracking expertise, which is rogue blood, which is generally a good source to get undead or monster parts, as well as creature hides. And then we also have humble appearance, which is worker blood,
and Draculan blood as well.
and these locations typically yield in cloth, coins, food, or knowledge-based goods, typically in towns or civilized areas. And then lastly, we have Sacred Resistance, which is Scholar Blood, which usually yield a variety of important crafting goods, typically in areas that have dangerous element conditions, such as garlic or holy radiation or even lightning. And by having the correct blood type for these missions, you will simply lower that difficulty rating by 100. Meaning, you don't have to gear out your minions as high to send them on these missions. You could potentially send them earlier and waste less time gathering gear for your minions. I do want to point out, though, that you'll always be able to gather substantially more resources in the same amount of time that these hunts will take. Which is why there are some hunts that are better than others in terms of time investment, as well as in-game risk, too. For example, hitting up the iron mine on a popular PvP server can typically be a war zone and end up being your demise, depending on how busy that server is. So if that's the case, why not send a lovely brute there, perhaps from the Dunley Farmlands, to secure that 20% extra resource bonus in your stead. But another way of looking at hunts is sending your servants to previous zones to acquire goods you need in order to progress forward, as all of these resources in the game are going to be needed in endgame. And sometimes they are a little bit too far out of your way to go get, so it's probably best to send a minion out there. So now we'll go over the different zones, and I'll mention which hunts I think are worthwhile for your servants to go to, and which hunts I think are a waste of time. Starting in Farbane Woods, I usually send my minions to the Copper and the Sulfur Quarries. Both require brute blood. These will yield sulfur and copper, obviously. Sometimes I'll send them to the fishing lake to get oil and fish, if I'm feeling lazy to fish them myself, and the other hunts aren't particularly worth it in my opinion. Because by the time you really get the servants running, you won't really need much stuff from Farbane Woods beyond the copper and sulfur, because you can also get those from other resources and some of the carriages, and not to mention chests too. And once you are able to send your servants to the Gloomrot locations, the copper and sulfur mine will become defunct because there will be a better hunt for both of those resources in one. And we'll get to that in a moment. But before we move on to the Dunley Farmlands, I must mention the Hollowed Mountain, this snowy area that is often forgotten. Hopefully we see an update in a future patch because this is so tiny, and for some reason it's considered the Farbane Woods. See here, it's an okay supply of thick hide. And as I say, for most of these locations that generate hide, you're usually better off just going and hunting it yourself, but perhaps you're lazy, so send your minions to go do it for you. Moving on to the Dunley Farmlands, this is where you really want to have at least 1 or 2 servants that have enough gear to tackle these hunts. Dawnbreak Village, to the southeast part of the Dunley Farmlands, can bring a decent amount of tailoring goods such as cloth and wool thread to help jumpstart your tier 2 crafting. And as you can see here, it's not a ton in the 2 hours, but that still could at least make you 1 piece of gear, which could be all the difference. Especially during the early stages of a server wipe, these areas are really hot, so it's always a really good idea to just send your servants there, that way you can guarantee to get these resources, because you might not be able to make it out alive with them. But really, the main hunts I use here are the cotton farms. As you can see here, we will send... Character here, doesn't really matter what level they are. In 2 hours, they will generate 200 to 250 cotton, unless you have a Dunley Farmlands character, and they'll generate a lot more. And honestly, getting about 250 cotton every 2 hours is going to be more than enough for your needs. Beyond your initial cotton run, of course, and during all the garlic. And you'll be using this hunt quite often until you get enough cotton seeds to just farm the cotton from the safety of your home yourself. But iron you're going to need throughout the entirety of the game, and as I mentioned before, on PvP servers, this can be a very hot location, and may not be safe for you to gather said iron ore. See here, we can send 2 people here. If we had a person from the Dunley Farmlands, we would be able to get a lot more. And then We also have the Church of the Damned up here, which we can send a Dunley Farmlands rogue or something like that to help reduce the cost. And this will give us a decent amount of bones and grave and scourge stone to help us craft our amulets earlier, which is very useful. Unfortunately, you only get 2 scourge stone per 2 hours, but that's fine for it being free. And you can always craft it yourself by grinding the bone dust into grave dust and then turning the grave dust with the whetstones into scourge stone. Not a crazy hunt, but it's still useful nonetheless. The quartz quarry is also a great spot to send your servants from time to time, since bottles and sludge-filled canisters won't be making themselves. And beyond your first big haul of the quartz quarry, you might just want to keep sending your minions there. That way you don't have to take another trip back to this location. So in 2 hours, you can get about 600 to 700 quartz, and obviously a lot more if you have the Dunley Farmlands Hunter perk, which simply just means you need somebody from Dunley Farmlands, and we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, those are pretty much your main hunts you're going to go for, is the iron mine and the cotton mines, and then maybe some stuff in the villages, maybe some stuff in the Church of the Damned. You'll definitely be periodically sending them to the quartz quarry. The Dunley Monastery and the Bastion of Dunley, those are okay locations as well. But I don't really feel like I'm hurting for Morning Lily or for Gem Dust. With all the jewels added in Gloomrot, you can just throw those into your Devourer, which will extract the gems from them. You can just grind those and bam, you got some Gem Dust. Moving on to the Gloomrot, there are actually a lot of really, really good hunts for you to send your minions. Notably, I'll start with the Transcenda Mine, which will have a substantial amount of copper and sulfur. And of course, if you had somebody from the Gloomrot here, you'll just get even more. Look at that, 760 to 900 copper, and then about 600 sulfur. That's a lot of resources for free. Some other great locations here could be the Pools of Rebirth to help you get some mutant grease and sludge-filled canisters. However, if you are not stubborn like me, you should definitely be utilizing your Vermin Nest, as you can create some monsters from the Vermin Nest to generate tons of mutant grease for you. So maybe this hunt isn't as valuable for you. The Transcendum Machine Factory, as well as the Rustlock Village, are both really good spots to get tech scrap. So in 2 hours, they get about 250 tech scrap, which is pretty solid, and then some scrolls to help get your research, as well as cloth. Not terrible. But if we compare it to the Transcendum Machine Factory, it's almost the same amount of gear score required for this location. And we get almost double that tech scrap, as well as just some radium alloy outright. So this is a pretty good spot to send your people. Moving on to Northern Gloomrot, both of these locations are just okay. I don't usually send them there, because look at that. It's only about 200 tech scrap, which is the same as the earlier area, and I don't think it's really worth it, especially because you can get depleted batteries really easily by killing the walkers there, but that's beyond the point. The Transcendent Machine Factory is definitely the place you want to go for tech scrap, because that's a really annoying thing to farm constantly, because you need it for a ton of recipes, and there's not really a way for you to gather that safely at home, like the mutant grease. And the Transcendent Laboratories you can send as well to get you some more mutant grease, and a little bit of glass, but I don't think it's really worth it. I do think it's worth it for you just go to the Transcendent Laboratory yourself, because there's usually a lot of really good chests here, and you can find a lot of really great resources here. Moving on to the Cursed Forest, I don't really think most of these locations are worthwhile for your people to go on hunts on, because you can just get a lot more resources by just going yourself. And as I mentioned before, this is not really worth your time. By just simply killing 1 or 2 enemies there, you easily get about 300 pristine hide just from within seconds of entering the damn forest. So I would not send your minions to this location. Cursed Village, you can give you a decent amount of ghost crystal and grave dust. However, I think it's much better for you to harvest it yourself, since there is a cave right here, and that you can just quickly gather this crystal and then teleport to safety to that mine, which will take you to the opposite side of Farbane Woods, down over here. That way you can take it to your base if you're in this area. Pretty much the only hunt I would send them to is probably the Cursed Forest itself right here, this really big oval one. As you can see, you get an okay amount of pristine hide, more so than the Cursed Swamp, but you get a decent amount of ghost shrooms, which are very, very important for the late game. It is a worthwhile investment to send them here, but I wouldn't prioritize it. It does use a rogue, and we'll get into what servants you're going to want for your base later, and you may or may not want a rogue. But getting a decent amount of ghost shrooms makes this hunt probably the best one out of this area. The rest of this stuff can be farmed at home, or just by teleporting over there and just doing a quick run yourself. It's not too hard to get. But the ghost rooms are kind of annoying, at least until you can either afford to purchase the ghost rooms yourself, or perhaps you manage to harvest them. And also, the one thing to note for all of these missions, not just the ones I've mentioned so far, at the bottom here, they always say general area loot. So that could be scrolls, books, seeds, or whatever from the region. So that might also be a reason why you might send them to a specific location. Moving on to Silverlight, there are a lot of good locations and a lot of bad ones. The best locations by far is the Silver Mine. By sending nobody from Silverlight here, I get 360 to 450 silver ore. And if we just slap in somebody from Silverlight, that bumps up to 450 to 550. Pretty nice. And the best part is, you don't need to carry this home, because your servers will just teleport back to your base with the goods in hand. And you're obviously going to need a lot of silver in the end game. Getting one full run by consuming a silver potion to carry more, you'll have enough silver to last you for quite a few dark silver weapons, but eventually you're going to need more, and you might not want to hoof it through that mine and just send your minions instead. Not to mention you don't have to waste resources on making silver resistance potions as well. Yeah, Sacred Silver Mine is very, very good to send them to. Other locations you can send them to are the Brighthaven Cathedral, the Brighthaven Square, Brighthaven Trade District, and the Brighthaven Docks. While you can send them to these locations, each one gives different resources. I personally like to do this myself because this is, in my opinion, one of the more fun farms in the game, which is so many minions for you to fight. But at the same time, people might not like that and might find it tedious, so they'll send their minions instead. As you can see here, the Brighthaven Docks will yield you some oil and fish, which is probably the more important part of this spot, because getting good fish will help you keep your prisoners alive longer, which allows you to keep your blood around a lot longer. And we'll go into that in another video. So the Brighthaven Trade District is a decent amount of spot to get coins, but I'm not really usually pressed for these, so I would not send your minion to the Trade District. Square, however, will also give you a decent amount of coin, but it also gives you jewelry, which is very, very useful and a must-have resource in the end game. But again, by simply just going to this area and just killing a bunch of people, you'll get tons more gold jewelry. But this is not a decent haul for only 2 hours of sending your minions out, and that probably equaled about 3 to 4 gold bars, depending on what else you got. Same thing with the cathedral. You can also get gold jewelry there, and a little bit more, as well as some schematics. So this could also be a decent hunt for you. Then you can also send your people to the vineyards. But honestly, when you go over there yourself and attack the boss there, just make sure to just harvest all the grapes, and make sure you keep an eye out for these big barrels right here that have the grapes in them. There should be 4 of them. I believe 2 of them are right here where my mouse is. Another one's over here, and I think another one's right here. If you search these, you could potentially get grape seeds and just plant them at home. So that makes this particular location a lot less useful. Similarly, the Harpy Nests, both of these locations are the same, identical. They will give you gem dust, gemstones, and blood essence. With how much the game sends those spell-enhancing jewels, you can just break them down and get the gemstones you need. I've never had to send anybody here, and I barely even went there myself. I honestly only killed the boss there just because I just wanted to complete all my bosses. Beyond that, I've never really gone to this location to gather gemstones, because I never needed to. Anyways, moving on. This brings us back to our last location, the Ruins of Mortium. Sending them to this bottom left location, the West Fortress Ruins, we can send our minion here to gather us a small haul of Stygian shards, which is okay. But more importantly, we want to send them to Dracula's Castle Garden, which will get the greater Stygian shards. While it's not a ton, it is a decent amount, and after sending them there a few more times, you could use the Stygian to summon minions, or you could potentially get more passives, or more importantly, purchase ancestral weapons and legendary weapons. I wouldn't rely on this as your main source of Stygian, but perhaps there might be people in your server gatekeeping that region, and you might not be able to successfully get stuff in there. So you'll want to send your minions to both of these locations. And one thing to note too is if you have multiple castles, your servants in the other castle can also double dip in these locations. Otherwise, as you can see here, we'll just send somebody to the iron mine. Hunt has begun, and unfortunately, we can't send anybody else there. But if we have another castle, those servants from that castle can come to this location too. So each of these areas are going to be locked per castle. Whew. All right, so that was the mission table. Now let's get into what are some of the best minions. Because not only can you send them off to these hunts to get your resources, they will actually physically defend your base should it be raided and an enemy decides to storm your castle. As you can see, all these doors that have the pink keys on them, this means that a servant cannot open these doors. So say if there's an enemy on the other side, they can't open the door to engage them. If it was just a regular door, they certainly can. They will open that and potentially make a door open, allowing invaders to hop in there. Not to mention they'll go out and fight. One thing to note is when you have your minions, you're going to want to equip them with gear and all that stuff, but we'll get into that in a moment. When you're looking for minions to help defend your base, you're definitely going to want to find enemies that are annoying to fight out in the real world, because they will maintain all of their abilities they have before you capture them. In Act 1 in the Farbane Woods, there isn't anything too crazy that you should keep an eye out for. You might get yourself an early rogue or brute to help you gather these missions early, but you'll be replacing them pretty soon. In the Dunley Farmlands, however, there are actually a pretty decent amount of minions here that are not too bad in base defense, such as the militia brutes, the big guys with the shields that charge you. They do it. Not to mention that brutes are one of the better minion types you're going to want, since they can go to all the mine locations. The militia archers, you know, the ones that shoot those annoying fire arrows, can also be pretty decent in PvP situations. However, that fire can also hurt you and your troops, so it's a little bit risky if you want to use them, but they can definitely help defend your castle. And some of the rogue locations are not too shabby either. Nuns are also pretty good for early mid-game PvP, at least until you can get to Brighthaven, as they can keep you and your servants alive. Not to mention that they have the Sacred Resistance, allowing them to get into these cotton farms a lot easier, and then them being from Dunley also just increases your cotton yields from them. And then moving on to Gloomrot, there are a lot of really cool minions. I really wish we could grab those mechanical walker guys. That'd be sick, but that'd probably be insane just having a bunch of just Gatling turrets everywhere. Anyways, personally, I think the best minion from the Gloomrot is easily the tractor beam shield guys. You don't need to have a ton of them, but at least one of them could be pretty annoying, potentially sucking your enemies towards the rest of your servants and yourself. Pretty solid. And if you want to be even more reckless than the fire archers, go ahead and grab one of these flamethrower guys. They'll set everybody on fire for sure. The rogue zapper guys, they could potentially be okay, but I don't think there's really any rogues in the game that are actually worthwhile for defense. Maybe the pistol whip guys in the silver mine, but we'll get there in a moment. You'll notice that there is the cursed forest hunter, but you probably can't find any humans around here. Well, if you come to this village just outside of the southern teleporter, where you'll also find Wilfred, one of the V-Bloods here, spoiler alert, they turn into werewolves. And during the daytime, they will be human. And you can capture these guys while they're human and get them to your base and also turn them into servants. You could also capture them as a prisoner and they will yield you creature and worker blood as long as it's the right time of day. So as obviously right here, nighttime, we can sap him and we get some creature blood. During the daytime, he'll be worker. But they are the only minion in the game that gets the Cursed Forest Hunter. So if there's some of these hunts that you really want to get early on, maybe capture one of these villagers for you and they'll help you out. For base defense, they're absolutely useless because they do not transform into their werewolves, unfortunately. In early access, they used to still turn into the werewolves just like they do in the prison right now. But if you had them as a servant, they would turn into werewolf and break free. So they no longer do that. Moving on to Brighthaven, this is where you're probably going to see most people have their servants be from. This is chock full with lots of really great units. Paladins, clerics, lightweavers, and maybe even priests. And of course, there's the little rifle guys, but they're not too great on their own. As mentioned, I do think the pistol whip guys in the silver mine might be worthwhile if you really wanted to have at least one rogue in your castle to send them on the rogue missions. And you can't go wrong with having the paladins, clerics, and lightweavers. Paladins are the big tanky boys here, as you can see. They have these big maces, and they have a few really annoying attacks. Lightweavers, they are very annoying to fight as well. They'll be darting around the enemy, and they also have a few AoE spells that just nuke your enemy from afar. Pretty solid. And then you have the clerics, which are probably what I think to be the best minion for your defense. They can be a little bit annoying to fight. They have that little shield block that stuns people. They can shoot enemies from afar. They can pick an ally to heal, including yourself, and will continuously heal you during a fight. And yeah, they're really a solid minion to have in your base. People swear by the priests as well for the same thing, but I don't really find the priest really impactful, whereas the cleric can be annoying with the stuns and crowd control. The priest, not so much. I think his little orb things can also stun, but in my personal opinion, I'm not a fan of the priests. Other people might be. Pick whatever you'd like to have in your base. It's all up to you at the end of the day. And then moving on to the ruins of Mortium, there really is only two different types of minions we can capture at the moment, which are the succubi, which can be very annoying for your enemy, and for you too if you're fighting them, as they'll just constantly charm people, which can disrupt your enemies and be very useful. The duelists, I think they're called executioners. I don't know. The vampires with the swords, they're also very, very good for base defense as well, because they jump out of the way, they try to be safe, and they have a little range abilities to attack from afar. But more importantly, they're kind of similar to a sword wielder, and they'll be able to incapacitate somebody as well. So that might be something you should look out for. And for a typical balanced setup, I would highly suggest running 2 paladins, 2 clerics, 2 lightweavers, and then 2 others of your choice. Maybe another cleric, perhaps some of the Draculans. Alternatively, you can also replace the paladins with the Draculan duelists. I always forget the name of them. Or you can go with the most dreaded servant build of all. Now let's move on to how to make these minions effective. So as you can see here on this minion, he has an expertise of 24%. Now this was granted based on the blood quality of the minion when you find him out in the real world. And expertise will enhance a few stats based on whatever your gear level is. You'll get more max health, more damage, more loot, and better hunt proficiency the higher your expertise is. And I believe the highest you can get on a minion is 44 or 45%, and that's at 100% blood. So as you can see here, this warrior in particular, when I had him captured, he had a 74% blood quality, meaning he has a chance to have 23 to 28 expertise. Now let's go ahead and look at another character here. So he has 41%, as I believe when I captured him, he was at 97% blood. I don't remember. But if I were to gear him up with my gear, for example, getting him up to 89, having him at 90 puts him at 1,303 health, 155 physical attack power, and then, yeah, it's pretty good. And he'll hit, obviously, a lot harder than the other one. I'm going to show you a couple clips here that shows the same exact gear being put on both of these different characters. One with the 41% expertise and one with the 27. And you can see the little bit of difference here. Which also just shows it's important to gear up your minions, not just to be able to send them on better hunts, but so that they can help defend your base even better. One thing to note, though, is if an enemy were to kill your minion, they will drop that gear. So be careful what you put on them and when you let them loose to attack your enemies. Otherwise, you're just going to be out of potentially a high-tier set for free. So that's something to consider. On the other side of things, if you were to invade somebody's base, maybe you might want to focus on killing these servants and taking their gear, because they're probably going to be good quality, if they decided to gear their minions at all.
Shout out to my friend Emu for being a punching bag.
Alright, and that, my friends, will conclude this video. I really hope you guys learned something. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more guides like these. And let me know what your favorite servants are in this game. And I'll see you in the next video. Farewell for now.